My mom discovered my true income, so she showed up at my door with my spoiled half-brother and audaciously demanded that I sign over the deed to my new house to them. My name is Madison, and I am 32 years old. If you looked at my life right now, you would see a senior data analyst living in a beautiful, quiet neighborhood in Orlando, Florida. You would see someone who has their life entirely together. I have a stable career, a solid group of friends, and, most importantly, I am the sole owner of a gorgeous 4-bedroom house. That house is my sanctuary. It is the physical proof that I survived my past. But to understand why that house means everything to me and why I reacted the way I did when my past came knocking, I have to take you back 23 years to a small, suffocating town in Ohio. I was 9 years old when the floor fell out from under my world. I still remember the exact details of that Tuesday evening. The house smelled like cheap laundry detergent and overcooked pasta. My father, Harrison, was still at work. I was sitting on the living floor, trying to figure out a math worksheet, when my mother, Margaret, walked out of her bedroom carrying a large navy blue suitcase. She did not look at me directly. She just kept her eyes fixed on the front door. She wore a coat I had never seen before, something that looked too expensive for our budget. I asked her where she was going. She paused for a fraction of a second, her hand resting on the brass doorknob. She muttered something about needing space, something about how she could not breathe in this life anymore. And then she opened the door, stepped out into the chilly autumn air, and pulled the door shut behind her. The click of that lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It echoed in my head for years. Margaret did not just leave to find herself. She left to find someone else. She had been having an affair with a man who promised her a bigger house, a better car, and a life away from the struggles she shared with my father. She vanished completely, moving across the state, leaving my dad and me to pick up the shattered pieces of our reality. When my dad came home that night and saw the empty closet, he did not scream or break things. He just sat at the kitchen table, put his face in his rough, calloused hands, and let out a single, broken breath. From that day on, it was just the two of us against the world. My father was a good man, but a tired one. He ran a small diner right off the local highway. It was a greasy spoon in every sense of the word. The kind of place that served heavy breakfasts, burnt coffee, and burgers that dripped with oil. He worked 16-hour shifts, 6 days a week. I spent most of my childhood in one of the back booths of that diner, doing my homework under the flickering fluorescent lights, while the smell of old cooking grease settled permanently into my clothes and my hair. I would watch him behind the counter. His hands were always covered in tiny burn marks from the grill. His shoulders slumped heavily under the weight of an apron that never seemed totally clean, no matter how many times we washed it. We were barely surviving. Some nights, after paying the suppliers and the utility bills for the restaurant, my dad would bring home less than $40. The diner was a sinking ship, and he was the captain desperately bailing water with a slotted spoon. I knew we were poor. I knew it when I saw the stack of final notice bills sitting on our kitchen counter. I knew it when my dad skipped dinner, claiming he had eaten a big lunch at the diner, just so I could have the last serving of whatever cheap casserole we had managed to put together. But he never complained. He just worked harder. And every year on my birthday, a cheap, generic card would arrive in the mail from Margaret. It always had exactly $20 tucked inside, along with a hollow, thoughtless message written in her looping handwriting. Happy birthday, Madison. Hope you are well. It felt like a slap in the face every single time. It was a yearly reminder that she was out there, living a comfortable life, while the man she abandoned worked himself to the bone just to keep the lights on for her daughter. The defining moment of my childhood, the one that hardwired my brain for the rest of my life, happened when I was 13. It was the middle of February, and Ohio was hit by a massive, brutal winter storm. The snow piled up for days, burying cars and paralyzing the town. The power lines snapped under the weight of the ice, leaving our neighborhood completely in the dark. Our small house lost heating immediately. I remember wearing 3 pairs of socks, my winter coat, and wrapping myself in every blanket we owned, but the cold still seeped into my bones. You could see your breath in the living room. My dad, ever the provider, dragged an old camping stove out of the garage and set it up by the back door. He started boiling water and cooking cans of soup, not just for us, but for the elderly couple living next door. I watched him trudge through knee-deep snow, freezing and exhausted, just to make sure our neighbors had something warm to eat. As I sat there shivering, staring at the frost forming on the inside of my bedroom window, a stark realization hit me. I realized that nobody was coming to save us. Margaret was sitting somewhere in a warm, well-lit house with her new husband, completely unbothered by whether her firstborn daughter was freezing in the dark. I realized that relying on other people was a dangerous game. My dad was my hero, but he was drowning. I could not be another weight pulling him under. I had to save myself, and in doing so, I would save him. That winter storm birthed something inside me. Therapists later called it hyperindependence, a trauma response to abandonment. I just called it survival. I vowed right then and there that I would never be helpless again. I would never be in a position where my safety, my warmth, or my meals depended on someone else's whims. I started working the second the snow melted. I was too young for a real job, so I hustled. I started delivering the morning newspapers. I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning, load my rusted bicycle with heavy stacks of paper, and pedal through the biting cold before the sun even thought about rising. My hands would be numb, my legs would ache, but every dollar I made felt like a tiny brick being laid in the wall I was building around myself. As I got into high school, I took on more. I cleaned houses for the wealthy families on the other side of town. I scrubbed their pristine white toilets, vacuumed their thick carpets, and dusted their expensive picture frames. I would look at their lives, their matching furniture, their full refrigerators, and a fierce, burning ambition would light up my chest. I wanted that security. I wanted an impenetrable fortress of financial stability. I gave most of my earnings to my dad to help with the electric bill or groceries, but I hoarded a small percentage in a shoebox hidden under my bed. School became my weapon. While other teenagers were going to football games and hanging out at the mall, I was buried in textbooks. I discovered I had a natural talent for numbers and patterns. Math made sense to me. It was absolute. It did not abandon you on a Tuesday evening with a navy blue suitcase. If you followed the rules, the equation always balanced out. My high school guidance counselor noticed my relentless drive and told me about the booming field of data analytics. She helped me apply for every single scholarship available in the state and beyond. I wrote essays about the diner, about the freezing nights, about the fire in my gut. When the acceptance letters rolled in, my dad actually cried. I had won a full-ride academic scholarship to a state university. It was my ticket out. It was the first step toward building my armor. But even with tuition covered, I knew the real war was just beginning. I packed my bags, hugged my father tight, and promised him that one day, he would never have to flip another burger again. College was not a 4-year party for me. It was a grueling, relentless grind. My scholarship covered my classes and my dorm, but it did not cover textbooks, food, or the basic cost of being alive. Because I refused to ask my dad for a single dime, I treated my university years like a survival marathon. By my sophomore year, I was juggling 3 part-time jobs alongside a full-course load of advanced mathematics and computer science. I woke up at 5 in the morning to work at the campus coffee shop, smelling like roasted beans before my 8 o'clock lecture. In the afternoons, I did data entry for a local logistics company, staring at spreadsheets until my vision blurred. On weekends, I went back to cleaning houses, a humbling reminder of where I came from. There were days when the exhaustion was so deep it felt like lead in my veins. I survived on cheap instant ramen, black coffee, and pure, concentrated spite. Every time I wanted to quit, every time I wanted to sleep in, I thought about Margaret's $20 birthday cards. I thought about the smell of old grease on my dad's apron. That anger was the perfect fuel. It burned hot and clean, pushing me to ace every exam, secure the best internships, and graduate at the absolute top of my class. My hard work paid off the moment I threw my graduation cap in the air. I had multiple job offers lined up, but I chose a massive tech firm down in Orlando, Florida. I needed distance. I needed to be as far away from the snowy, bitter memories of Ohio as possible. Orlando felt like another planet. It was sunny, vibrant, and bursting with opportunity. I packed everything I owned into my beat-up sedan and drove south to start my real life. I started as a junior data analyst. I threw myself into the corporate world with the same ferocity I had applied to delivering newspapers. While my colleagues were leaving at 5 to hit the local bars, I was staying late, writing complex Python scripts to automate tedious data processes. I made myself indispensable. The promotions came quickly. Within 5 years, I climbed from junior to mid-level, and then to a senior analyst position leading my own team. With each promotion came a significant salary bump. For the first time in my entire life, I looked at my bank account and did not feel a crushing wave of panic. I had done it. I had built the financial wall. With this new life came a new family. I met Amber, Colin, and Mia at the office. They were smart, hilarious, and fiercely loyal. We bonded over late-night project deadlines and cheap takeout, and eventually, they became my core support system. They were the ones who taught me that family is not about blood, it is about who shows up for you when things get hard. But my greatest achievement, the thing that made all the sleepless nights worth it, was what I was able to do for my dad. The moment my senior salary kicked in, I drove up to Ohio, sat him down in his crumbling diner, and told him he was done. He fought me on it, his pride stubborn as ever, but I refused to take no for an answer. I took over all his debts. I set up an automatic transfer of $1,000 into his account every single month. I paid for the repairs the diner needed so he could finally sell it at a decent price. The day the sold sign went up in the window of that greasy spoon was one of the best days of my life. My dad finally retired. He bought a little fishing boat, something he had talked about since I was a kid, and he sounded 10 years younger every time we spoke on the phone. I had fixed his life. I had fixed my life. I thought the worst was permanently behind us. With my dad settled and my career soaring, I set my sights on the ultimate symbol of security, a home of my own. I did not want to rent anymore. Renting meant someone else held the keys to my safety. I wanted my name on a deed. I wanted dirt and bricks that belonged entirely to me. The house hunting process in Orlando was brutal. The market was highly competitive, and I spent 8 agonizing months touring properties. I lost out on 3 different houses due to crazy bidding wars where investors came in with all-cash offers. Every rejection felt like a personal failure, triggering that old childhood fear of being left out in the cold. But I am nothing if not persistent. Finally, I found it. It was a beautiful, completely renovated 4-bedroom house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb. It had a massive kitchen with marble countertops, a huge backyard, and a wraparound porch. It was way more house than a single 32-year-old woman needed, but I didn't care. I wanted the space. I wanted the undeniable proof that I had made it. The day I signed the mortgage papers, my hand was shaking. I was committing to a massive financial responsibility, but the moment the real estate agent handed me the shiny new keys, a profound sense of peace washed over me. I drove to the property, unlocked the heavy oak front door, and walked into the empty living room. I sat down right on the bare hardwood floor and cried. They were not tears of sadness, they were tears of absolute relief. I looked around at the clean white walls and the sunlight streaming through the large windows. This was my fortress. No landlord could kick me out. No storm could freeze me. And no one could ever pack a navy blue suitcase and walk out the door, because this was mine. I was the master of this domain. I spent the next year turning the house into a home. I bought custom rugs, comfortable furniture, and decorated the guest rooms perfectly for when my dad or my friends came to visit. The house became the central hub for our friend group. Amber, Colin, and Mia were over almost every weekend for barbecues or movie nights. The house was filled with warmth, laughter, and the smell of good food. I was incredibly proud of it. The deed to that house, safely locked in my fireproof safe, was my most prized possession. It represented 23 years of blood, sweat, and absolute determination. It was my armor against a cruel world. I really believed I was untouchable. I believed that I had built my walls so high and so thick that the ghosts of my past could never find a way in. I was so incredibly wrong. Because while I was busy building my empire in the Florida sun, the past was quietly tracking me down, preparing to launch an invasion I never saw coming. If you find this video interesting and relate to my story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach more viewers. Thank you very much. It was a perfectly normal Tuesday evening in late October. The brutal Florida summer heat had finally broken, leaving behind a comfortable, breezy dusk. I had just pulled my car into my spacious driveway after a long, productive day at the office. I popped the trunk and gathered 3 heavy canvas bags full of groceries. I was planning to cook a nice dinner, pour a glass of expensive red wine, and relax in my fortress. I was walking up the paved pathway toward my front door, balancing the bags, when a voice sliced through the quiet evening air. "Madison? Oh my God, look at you. You grew up so beautifully." I froze. The bags slipped slightly in my grip. My brain struggled to process the sound. It was a voice I had not heard in over 2 decades, a voice that belonged strictly to my nightmares and a few dusty memories. I turned around slowly. Standing at the edge of my driveway, illuminated by the warm glow of my landscaping lights, was Margaret. My mother. She looked older, of course. The expensive clothes she had worn the day she left were replaced by a slightly faded blouse and cheap slacks. Her hair was dyed a harsh, brassy blonde. But the calculating look in her eyes was exactly the same. Standing next to her, slouching defensively with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of an oversized hoodie, was a teenage boy. He looked about 18, with unkempt hair and a perpetual scowl on his face. I knew immediately who he was. This was Logan, my half-brother. The golden child she had stayed for. Before I could find my voice, before I could even drop my groceries, Margaret rushed forward. She closed the distance between us and threw her arms around me in a suffocating, aggressive hug. I stiffened like a board. I did not drop the bags. I did not hug her back. I just stood there, completely rigid, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. She smelled like cheap floral perfume and stale airplane coffee. "I cannot believe we found you," she gushed, pulling back to look at my face, her eyes wide with manufactured emotion. "It has been so long, my sweet girl. I have missed you every single day." The lie was so massive, so incredibly blatant, that it actually made me nauseous. I took a deliberate step back, putting physical distance between us. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, cold, flat, and devoid of any warmth. Margaret's fake smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered, adopting a deeply pitiful expression. "We just had to see you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Things have been so incredibly hard, Madison. My husband, he lost everything. His business went completely under. He filed for bankruptcy, and then he just took off. Left Logan and me with absolutely nothing." She gestured toward the sullen teenager, who had now pulled out his phone and was furiously typing, completely ignoring the emotional performance happening in front of him. "We barely scraped together enough money for the cheapest budget flight down here," Margaret continued, wiping a non-existent tear from her eye. "We are staying at this horrible, disgusting, cheap motel off the highway. It smells like mold, and the lock on the door barely works. We are just so desperate, Madison. We had nowhere else to turn." My mind was racing. How did she find my exact address? How did she know I lived in Florida? I had meticulously scrubbed my presence from public social media. But the shock of seeing her standing on my pristine driveway overrode the logic. I was caught completely off guard. "Please," Margaret begged, taking another step toward me and looking at the large house behind me. "Can we just come inside for a minute? Just for a glass of water? We are exhausted." Every instinct in my body screamed at me to say no. My fortress alarms were blaring. But I was holding heavy groceries, my neighbors were starting to peek out of their windows, and a small, pathetic part of my inner child, the 9-year-old girl sitting on the floor with her math homework, froze. Against my better judgment, Against every boundary I had built, I nodded curtly. Fine. Just for a minute. It was the biggest mistake of my life. The moment I unlocked the front door and pushed it open, the dynamic shifted entirely. Margaret and Logan did not walk into my home like weary, grateful travelers. They walked in like they were inspecting a property they had just won in an auction. I carried the groceries into the kitchen, setting them on the marble island. I expected them to sit quietly on the living room sofa, maybe look a little humbled. Instead, Logan bypassed the living room entirely and started wandering through the house. He didn't bother wiping his sneakers, tracking faint smudges of driveway dirt across my custom cream-colored rug. He walked straight into my kitchen, opened my stainless steel refrigerator without asking, and stared inside. "You got any energy drinks?" Logan asked, his voice dripping with teenage apathy. "This organic crap is gross." I stared at him, my blood pressure spiking. "Close the door," I snapped. He rolled his eyes, let the heavy fridge door slam shut, and wandered back out toward the hallway, trailing his hands along the freshly painted walls. Meanwhile, Margaret was putting on a masterclass in boundary stomping. She did not ask for a glass of water. She was too busy doing a slow, calculated 360-degree turn in the center of my living room. I watched her eyes dart over the leather furniture, the massive flat-screen television, the expensive art on the walls. I could practically hear the cash register ringing in her head as she took a visual inventory of my net worth. "Wow," she finally said, her voice dropping the pitiful act for a moment of genuine greed. "You have done very well for yourself, haven't you? This place is massive. Must have cost a fortune." "I worked hard for it," I replied coldly, leaning against the kitchen counter, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. "Now, why are you really here, Margaret?" She flinched slightly at the use of her first name, but quickly threw her mask of victimhood back on. She sat down heavily on my sofa, sighing dramatically. "I told you, Madison. We have nothing. My life has fallen completely apart. And I know you probably hate me, but you have to understand, it was your father's fault." I felt a hot, blinding flash of pure rage. "Excuse me?" Harrison was so controlling, she lied smoothly, looking me right in the eye. "After I left, he completely cut me off. He threatened me. He said if I ever tried to contact you, he would make my life a living hell. I wanted to see you, Madison. I wanted to be a mother to you, but he built a wall between us. He poisoned you against me." It was a staggering, audacious lie. My father had begged her to call. He had left voicemails pleading with her to at least talk to me on Christmas. She was trying to rewrite history right in front of my face, gaslighting me in my own living room. She was banking on the hope that I was still a naive, hurt little girl who would blindly believe the mother who abandoned her. "Don't you ever speak about my father like that," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "He worked himself into the ground to keep me fed after you walked out for a shiny new life. You sent $20 bills once a year. That was your choice, not his." Margaret realized the victim-blaming tactic was not working. She shifted gears seamlessly. Okay, the past is the past." She waved her hand dismissively, as if wiping away 23 years of trauma. "The point is, we are family. And right now, your family needs you. Logan is incredibly smart, Madison. He is 18. He is supposed to be starting college next year, but his father ruined his college fund. He is sleeping on a motel floor. His future is completely destroyed." I glanced over at Logan. The incredibly smart teenager was currently using his foot to nudge my expensive robotic vacuum cleaner, trying to make it beep. "That is unfortunate," I said flatly, keeping my emotional armor locked tight. "But that is not my problem." Margaret's eyes narrowed. The warmth completely vanished from her face, replaced by a hard, calculating glint. She was done playing games. Margaret stood up from the sofa. She smoothed down her cheap slacks and took a few steps toward the kitchen, leaning her hands on my marble island. She looked around the expansive room one more time before locking her eyes on mine. "Listen to me, Madison," she began, her tone taking on a bizarre, authoritative edge, as if she were a parent scolding a selfish child. "You are clearly incredibly wealthy. You are a senior analyst. I know what people in your position make. You are single, you have no children, and you are living in a 4-bedroom house that is completely wasted on one person. I tighten my grip on my own arms. Get to the point. Logan needs a foundation, she stated, her voice steady and entirely serious. He needs stability. He cannot start his adult life homeless and struggling. It isn't fair to him. You have already made it. You climbed the ladder. You could easily secure a mortgage on another nice place, maybe a luxury condo downtown, something more suited for a single woman. I stared at her, my brain desperately trying to connect the dots of her insane logic. What are you suggesting? Margaret took a deep breath and delivered the most unhinged demand I have ever heard in my entire life. I want you to sign over the house deed to Logan. Transfer the property to his name. You have enough cash flow to buy another one. He needs this house as a financial asset so we can borrow against it to pay for his tuition, and so we have a place to live. Family helps family, Madison. It is the right thing to do. For a full 10 seconds, the room was dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. I actually thought I might be having a stroke. My brain literally could not process the magnitude of the audacity. She did not ask for a loan. She did not ask to stay in the guest room. She walked into the fortress I had spent 23 years bleeding to build, and she demanded the keys. She demanded the ultimate symbol of my survival, simply because her golden child needed a stepping stone. A laugh bubbled up in my throat. It was not a happy laugh. It was a dark, hysterical sound that startled both her and Logan, who finally looked up from his phone. You want me to give my house to a teenager I met 5 minutes ago? I managed to say, the sheer absurdity of the words burning my tongue. He is your brother. Margaret snapped, her face flushing with anger. You're swimming in money. You're acting exactly like your father, selfish, hoarding everything for yourself while your own blood suffers in a disgusting motel. The mention of my father, the insult to the man who gave me everything, snapped whatever thin thread of restraint I had left. The shock evaporated, instantly replaced by a blinding, white-hot fury. I stood up straight, making myself as tall as possible. Get out, I said. My voice did not yell. It didn't need to. It was lethal. Margaret blinked, taking a step back. Madison, be reasonable. I said get the hell out of my house. I roared, the volume finally breaking loose. I slammed my hand down on the marble counter so hard the grocery bags jumped. You abandoned me for 23 years, you walk in here tracking dirt on my floors, you insult my father, and you demand my house. You are completely delusional. Get out right now before I call the police and have you dragged out in handcuffs. Logan jumped back, his eyes wide with sudden fear. Margaret looked furious, her jaw clenched tight. She wanted to fight, but she saw the absolute murder in my eyes and realized she had miscalculated my strength. She grabbed Logan by the arm of his hoodie. You are going to regret this, you selfish brat, she spat, her true colors finally flying free. We are not done. She marched to the front door, dragging Logan behind her. They stepped out into the night, and I slammed the heavy oak door shut behind them, throwing the deadbolt, the chain, and the security lock. I leaned against the door, my entire body shaking with adrenaline and rage, breathing heavily in the silence of my safe, secure home. But the chilling truth lingered in the air. She had promised she wasn't done. And she meant it. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a deep sense of dread settling in my stomach. I hoped, perhaps naively, that my explosive reaction the night before had been enough to scare Margaret and Logan back to whatever cheap motel they were staying in, and eventually back to Ohio. I got dressed in my sharpest business suit, grabbed my briefcase, and drove to the massive glass building in downtown Orlando where my tech firm was located. Work was my sanctuary. It was a place where logic ruled, where data never lied, and where personal drama was strictly left at the door. I swiped my badge, rode the elevator to the 15th floor, and poured myself a black coffee, ready to bury my anxiety in a pile of complex spreadsheets. I was 2 hours into my morning, deeply focused on a quarterly predictive model, when the phone on my desk buzzed. It was the front desk receptionist from the main lobby downstairs. She sounded highly uncomfortable, her voice dropping to a hushed, apologetic whisper. She told me there was a woman in the lobby claiming to be my mother, and that she was causing a significant scene. My heart dropped entirely into my stomach. The blood drained from my face so fast I felt dizzy. I told the receptionist I would be right down, my hands trembling as I hung up the receiver. I rode the elevator down to the ground floor, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When the steel doors slid open, my nightmare was confirmed. Margaret was standing in the middle of our pristine, minimalist corporate lobby. She was wearing the exact same clothes from the night before, but her hair was deliberately messy, and her mascara was slightly smudged under her eyes to give the illusion that she had been weeping for hours. She was talking loudly to the security guard and the receptionist, putting on a sickeningly tragic performance. She was weaving a tale about how she was an abandoned, heartbroken mother who had traveled hundreds of miles with her poor teenage son, only to be turned away in the freezing cold by her wealthy, ungrateful daughter. A few of my colleagues were walking through the lobby, holding their coffees, slowing down to watch the spectacle. The humiliation washed over me like a tidal wave. My professional reputation, the pristine armor I had spent years polishing, was being dragged through the mud by the woman who had abandoned me. I walked straight up to her, grabbed her firmly by the upper arm, and dug my fingers in just enough to let her know I was not playing around. I looked at the receptionist, apologized profusely for the disturbance, and practically dragged Margaret toward the revolving glass doors. She stumbled slightly but followed, a triumphant little smirk flashing across her face before she hid it behind another fake sniffle. She thought she had won. She thought by invading my professional life, she could blackmail me into submission. I pulled her out onto the hot Orlando pavement and marched her toward a small, crowded coffee shop across the street to prevent a complete workplace scandal. We walked into the busy cafe, the smell of roasted espresso beans doing nothing to calm my racing pulse. I shoved Margaret toward a small table in the far corner, away from the windows. To my absolute disgust, Logan was already sitting there. He had apparently been waiting for her to retrieve me. He was loudly chewing on an expensive almond croissant, staring at his phone, looking completely unbothered by the fact that his mother was outside terrorizing my workplace. I slammed my hands down on the small wooden table, leaning in close so my voice would not carry over the background noise of the cafe. "If you ever step foot inside my office building again," I hissed, my voice shaking with pure, unadulterated fury, "I will have you arrested for trespassing and harassment so fast it will make your head spin." "What is wrong with you?" Margaret did not even blink. She sat down smoothly across from me, folding her hands on the table like a disappointed school teacher. She completely ignored my threat and immediately launched back into her manipulative gaslighting. She looked me in the eye and told me that I was acting hysterical, that I was being deeply selfish, and that I was turning into a spiteful, bitter woman just like my loser father. She actually used those exact words. She said I was hoarding my wealth while my own blood family was starving in the streets. Before I could tear her argument to shreds, Logan finally looked up from his brightly lit screen. He wiped a crumb off his chin and leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with an air of absolute entitlement. "Look," Logan said, his voice dripping with teenage arrogance. "If you are too cheap to give me the house deed, fine. Keep your stupid house. But my dad left us with nothing, and I need a way to get around when I start college. So, here's the deal. You owe me a car. Nothing crazy. Just something reliable, maybe a brand new sports car. Something around $40,000. You can easily afford that with the kind of money you make." I stared at him. The sheer, blinding audacity of his demand actually left me temporarily speechless. He honestly believed that because we shared a fraction of the same DNA, he was entitled to a $40,000 vehicle funded entirely by my years of suffering and hard work. He looked at me expectantly, as if he had just offered a totally reasonable compromise. I looked at Margaret. She was nodding in agreement, her eyes cold and calculating. "It is the least you can do, Madison," she said smoothly. "A $40,000 car is a small price to pay to help your brother get his life on track. You owe us that much after abandoning your family duties." The realization hit me right then, crystal clear and heavy as an anvil. There was absolutely no reasoning with them. They were not family. They were parasites. They did not love me, they did not want to reconnect with me, and they certainly did not care about the trauma they had inflicted on me. They viewed me purely as a walking, talking automated teller machine. They were going to drain me dry and then leave me empty, just like Margaret had done to my father 23 years ago. I did not scream. I did not argue. I calmly reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out a crisp $20 bill, and dropped it right in the middle of the table. "That is exactly what you sent me every year for my birthday," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "Consider our debt paid in full. Do not ever contact me again." I turned my back on them and walked out of the cafe, ignoring Margaret screaming my name from the corner table. I did not go back to the office. I called my manager, told her I had a severe family emergency, and drove straight back to my house. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were completely white. As I pulled into my driveway, the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a cold, creeping paranoia. My analytical brain, the one trained to spot patterns and uncover hidden data, kicked into high gear. How did Margaret find me? I had spent years scrubbing my personal information from the internet. I did not have public social media profiles. My home was purchased under a privacy trust to keep my name off public property records, specifically to avoid people like her. Yet, she knew my exact address. She knew the name of the tech firm I worked for. She knew roughly how much a senior data analyst at my company made. This was not a lucky guess. This was a targeted data breach. I locked all the doors to my house, pulled down the shades, and opened my personal laptop. I started digging. I did not check my own accounts first. My cybersecurity was ironclad. I thought about the weakest link in my digital circle. My father. Harrison was a wonderful man, but he was completely technologically illiterate. He had been using the exact same old Yahoo email account since the early 2000s. Whenever he had a computer problem, he gave me his password to fix it. I logged into his account, my heart pounding a heavy rhythm against my ribs. I went straight to the recent login activity logs. My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. Amidst the usual logins from my dad's location in Ohio, there were dozens of successful logins over the past 2 months originating from a completely different internet protocol address. An address that traced back to a town just a few miles from where Margaret lived with her new husband. I quickly checked the account security settings. The recovery question was, "What was the name of your first pet?" It was a question Margaret easily knew the answer to. She had deliberately guessed his security question, reset his password, and granted herself full, unrestricted access to 20 years of his private life. I clicked on his sent folder and searched my own name. There it was. An email I had sent my dad 8 months ago, bursting with pride, attaching my official promotion letter that clearly stated my new salary. Another email from 6 months ago, containing the final closing documents for my house, proudly displaying my brand new Orlando address. She had read every single word. She had stalked my financial milestones through the eyes of the man she had destroyed. The level of violation was so profound, so incredibly malicious, that it made me physically sick. This was not just a mother looking for a handout. This was a calculated, predatory cyber intrusion. She had hacked an elderly man's email to hunt down her estranged daughter's assets. The digital dagger was twisted deep into my back. Any lingering shred of guilt I felt about kicking her out vanished instantly. I was no longer dealing with an annoying relative. I was dealing with a criminal who wanted to steal my safety. I closed the laptop, picked up my phone, and prepared to go to war. The sun began to set, casting long, dark shadows across my front lawn. I was sitting on my living room sofa, staring blankly at the dark television screen, my laptop resting closed on the coffee table. I had spent the last 3 hours meticulously taking screenshots of the login activity from my father's email, compiling the digital footprints Margaret had carelessly left behind, and organizing everything into a secure, encrypted folder. I was building a fortress of evidence. Just past 8 o'clock, the heavy silence of my house was shattered by a violent, aggressive pounding on my front door. It wasn't a normal knock, it was the sound of someone hitting the wood with the side of their fist. The chime of my smart doorbell rang repeatedly, a frantic, annoying sound echoing through the hallway. I pulled out my phone and opened the security camera application. Margaret and Logan were standing on my porch. Margaret looked unhinged, her face twisted in anger, yelling something I could not hear through the thick oak door. Logan was kicking the base of my decorative planters, spilling expensive potting soil all over the clean concrete. They had actually come back. After the humiliation at the office, after I had walked out of the cafe, they still believed they could bully me into submission. They believed my boundaries were just suggestions. I did not walk to the door. I did not yell through the glass. I picked up my phone, dialed 911, and calmly told the dispatcher that two estranged, hostile individuals were aggressively trespassing on my property and refusing to leave. I sat on the sofa and watched the live feed on my phone. 10 minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of an Orlando police cruiser illuminated my driveway. Two uniformed officers stepped out and approached the porch. Instantly, Margaret's entire demeanor shifted. The aggressive pounding stopped. She smoothed her hair, plastered on a tearful, desperate expression, and started talking animatedly to the officers, pointing at my house and wiping her eyes. I could guess the script. She was a worried, loving mother just trying to check on her mentally unstable daughter. I unlocked the deadbolt and stepped out onto the porch, holding my phone and a printed copy of my property deed. The officers turned to me. Margaret tried to rush forward, crying my name, but one of the officers held up a hand to stop her. I spoke clearly and professionally. I informed the officers that I was the sole owner of the property, that I had not seen this woman in 23 years, and that she was attempting to extort me for a $40,000 car and the deed to my home. I then pulled out the printed screenshots showing the unauthorized access to my father's email account, explaining how she had illegally obtained my address. The officers looked at the documents, then looked at Margaret. Her fake tears instantly dried up, replaced by a look of genuine panic. The lead officer turned to her and sternly informed her that she was officially trespassing. He issued a formal, documented warning right there on the porch. He told Margaret and Logan that if they set foot on my property again, or if they showed up at my workplace, they would be immediately arrested and booked into the county jail. Margaret tried to argue, her voice shrill and desperate, but the officers were completely unbothered by her performance. They escorted her and Logan off my property, forcing them to walk down the street into the dark. I watched the taillights of the police cruiser fade away, a cold, hard resolve settling over me. The police were a temporary fix. I needed a permanent shield. The very next morning, I took a personal day from work and drove to the most ruthless family and civil litigation law firm in downtown Orlando. I did not want a friendly mediator. I wanted a legal shark. I sat across the polished mahogany desk from Bradley, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney with cold eyes and a reputation for completely dismantling his opponents in court. I did not cry. I did not act emotional. I simply opened my briefcase and slid the organized stack of evidence across his desk. I showed him the police report from the night before. I showed him the digital IP logs proving Margaret had hacked across state lines to access my father's email. I gave him the timeline of her abandonment, her sudden reappearance, the harassment at my corporate office, and the insane financial demands for the house deed and the $40,000 vehicle. Bradley reviewed the documents in complete silence for 10 minutes. When he finally looked up, he gave me a grim, approving nod. He told me we had more than enough concrete data to file for a permanent, comprehensive restraining order based on cyberstalking, harassment, and attempted extortion. We spent the next 4 hours drafting the legal petition. Bradley was meticulous, ensuring every single boundary-stomping action was legally categorized to paint a clear picture of Margaret as a predatory threat to my physical and financial safety. When I finally got back to my car, I had to do the hardest thing I had done in years. I had to call my father. I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth and listened to the line ring. When Harrison answered, his voice was warm and cheerful, completely oblivious to the war I was fighting. Taking a deep breath, I gently broke the news to him. I told him Margaret had showed up in Florida. I told him about the demands for the house. And then, my voice cracking slightly, I told him how she had used his old pet's name to hack into his Yahoo account and read our private emails to find me. The silence on the other end of the line was absolutely heartbreaking. I could hear the heavy, painful intake of his breath. For a moment, the strong man who had worked 16-hour shifts at a greasy diner sounded incredibly small and broken. He started apologizing repeatedly, his voice thick with guilt, blaming himself for not being smarter with computers, blaming himself for bringing this nightmare to my doorstep. I stopped him immediately. I told him forcefully that he was the victim of a cybercrime, that Margaret was a manipulative predator, and that he had absolutely nothing to apologize for. I spent the next hour walking him step by step through the process of setting up two-factor authentication, changing every single password he owned, and securing his digital life. By the time we hung up, he promised he would go to the local Ohio police station to file a secondary report regarding the unauthorized email access. I sat in the parking lot of the law firm, wiping angry tears from my face. Margaret had hurt me, and I could handle that. But she had violated my father's trust again, and for that, I was going to make sure she faced the absolute maximum penalty the law would allow. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting on a hard wooden bench in a sterile, brightly lit courtroom at the Orange County Courthouse. The air conditioning was freezing, but I was sweating under my tailored blazer. My lawyer, Bradley, sat next to me, calmly organizing his heavily tabbed binders of evidence. Across the aisle, sitting at the respondent's table, was Margaret. Logan was sitting in the back row of the public gallery, looking incredibly nervous, entirely stripped of his usual teenage arrogance. Margaret did not have a lawyer. She had clearly assumed she could charm her way out of this, relying on her classic manipulation tactics. When the judge, an older, stern-looking woman, called our case, Margaret immediately stood up and began her performance. Before Bradley could even present our petition, Margaret started speaking, her voice trembling perfectly. She told the judge she was just a heartbroken mother, that she had made mistakes in the past, but she only wanted to reconnect with her daughter. She claimed I was a wealthy, vindictive child who was trying to punish her for being poor, and that the police call was a massive misunderstanding. The judge listened patiently, her face completely unreadable. When Margaret finally finished her tearful monologue, the judge turned to my lawyer. Bradley stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and completely destroyed her in less than 5 minutes. Bradley did not argue emotions, he argued data. He presented the police report detailing the aggressive trespassing at my home. He submitted the sworn affidavits from my office security regarding the public harassment. And then he dropped the hammer. He presented the certified digital logs from the email provider, explicitly proving that Margaret had unlawfully accessed my father's private communications from a registered IP address linked to her location. He highlighted the exact emails she had read containing my salary and my home address. He painted a flawless, undeniable picture of a calculated cyberstalker hunting for financial gain. The color completely drained from Margaret's face. She tried to interrupt, stuttering that she only guessed the password because she was worried about my father's health, a lie so pathetic it actually made the judge scowl. The judge slammed her gavel down, silencing Margaret instantly. The judge looked at the evidence, looked at Margaret, and delivered a blistering reprimand. She stated that Margaret's actions were highly predatory, manipulative, and crossed the line into criminal harassment. Without a moment of hesitation, the judge granted the permanent restraining order. The order legally barred Margaret and Logan from coming within 500 feet of me, my home, or my workplace. It prohibited any form of digital contact, third-party messages, or social media harassment. If they violated the order even once, they would face immediate criminal charges and jail time. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 23 years. The heavy, invisible chain that tied me to the woman who abandoned me was legally and permanently severed. The iron wall was built. Margaret looked at me from across the room, her eyes filled with absolute venom, but she could not say a single word. She gathered her cheap purse and walked out of the courtroom, completely defeated by the very data and logic she had tried to exploit. You would think a court order threatening jail time would be enough to induce some self-reflection, but narcissists rarely change. Unable to physically harass me or steal my house deed, Margaret returned to Ohio and immediately launched a massive digital smear campaign. She took to Facebook, posting long, dramatic statuses about how her cruel, millionaire daughter had thrown her own flesh and blood out onto the street. She painted herself as a martyr, hoping to rally our extended family to pressure me into dropping the restraining order and sending her money. For a few days, it worked. I received a couple of confused, slightly judgmental text messages from distant cousins who had only heard her side of the story. I ignored them, refusing to engage in the drama. But then, the plot twisted in a way I never expected. My phone rang, and the caller ID showed the name of my Aunt Caroline, Margaret's older sister. I hesitated, assuming she was calling to berate me, but I answered anyway. Aunt Caroline's voice was tired but incredibly kind. She did not call to yell, she called to apologize. Caroline revealed that over the last 20 years, Margaret had secretly borrowed thousands of dollars from various family members, constantly citing fake emergencies, and had never paid a single dime back. She had burned almost every bridge she had. Caroline had seen Margaret's Facebook posts and knew exactly what game she was playing. That evening, Aunt Caroline did something incredibly brave. She wrote a massive public response on Facebook, tagging every single family member. She exposed Margaret's history of grifting. More importantly, she publicly validated my side of the story, explaining that Margaret had abandoned me as a child and had only shown up in Florida to illegally hack my father and extort my property. The backlash was immediate and devastating for Margaret. Stripped of her victim narrative, she was completely ostracized. The family entirely cut her off, leaving her and Logan to face the consequences of their greed alone. The silence that followed the storm was deafening, but this time, it was a peaceful silence. I started attending weekly sessions with Diana, a fantastic therapist specializing in family trauma. Diana helped me unpack the heavy, toxic guilt that society places on children to forgive their parents unconditionally. She helped me realize that walking away from abusive blood ties is not an act of cruelty, it is the ultimate act of self-care. I finally understood that Margaret's failure to be a mother was entirely her own brokenness, and it had absolutely nothing to do with my worth. To honor the struggle that built me, I took a large portion of my annual corporate bonus and established a small local charity in Orlando. The charity focuses on providing laptops, warm winter coats, and educational tutoring for teenagers living below the poverty line. It was my way of reaching back in time and giving a hand to the freezing, exhausted 13-year-old girl delivering newspapers in the snow. Last weekend, I hosted a massive barbecue in my backyard. The string lights were glowing, the grill was smoking, and the air was filled with loud, genuine laughter. My chosen family, Amber, Colin, and Mia, were all there, arguing playfully over a game of cards. Sitting at the head of the patio table, drinking a cold beer and looking healthier than ever, was my dad, Harrison. I looked around at my beautiful fortress, the deed safely locked away, and realized that I was completely surrounded by love. I had finally learned that true family is not defined by the people who share your genetics. It is defined by the people who respect your boundaries, celebrate your victories, and choose to stay when the lights go out. I worked for over 2 decades to build my safe haven, and they thought they could just swoop in, hack my father, and steal the deed to my life's work. My therapist says I did the right thing by completely cutting them out, but a few distant relatives still whisper that a house is just bricks and I should have helped my half-brother. So, tell me, am I the jerk for legally destroying my own mother and brother to protect my house and my peace? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button for more real-life drama and stories of standing your ground. Drop your thoughts in the comments below.